You're welcome back. We're turning our attention to mixed martial arts now because there's a fairly controversial UFC card on tonight. It's UFC 232. It's taking place at the Forum in Inglewood, California. It should have taken place in Las Vegas. And Niall McGrath of Off the Brawl is here to tell us why. Niall, a very good evening to you.
Owen, how are you? Good Christmas?
Good Christmas. Thank you very much. Yourself?
Yeah, a bit sick, but listen, we got a soldier on sometimes, don't we?
Absolutely, we do. I'm not going to ask you what the sickness is about, but we did want to bring you in to talk about this because this is something that I'm sure a lot of people will have seen, but not a lot of people will actually understand. So, Jon Jones is the character in question here, fighting Alexander Gustafsson tonight in the rematch for the title. Why is this such a controversial thing, and why has this been moved away from Las Vegas?
Basically, Jon Jones, there's been numerous amount of tests done by USADA, and there is still a residual effect. Apparently, that's all we've been really told from Jeff Nowitzki and USADA and the UFC of the steroids that he's actually coming back from his ban from 15 months ago when he was originally tested. So Nevada basically would not sanction the fight after they heard about this, which sort of leads to me as, why have USADA not been in contact with the Nevada State Athletic Commission? And hence, Jon Jones was cleared to fight in California by the California Athletic Commission. So the UFC have taken the crazy move on 6 days' notice to move this fight card, the whole entire fight card, to California in order for Jon Jones basically to be able to fight because he's fully licensed by the California State Athletic Commission. But then we've learned last night that the California Athletic Commission weren't aware of these results of the test. But still the fight is going ahead because he is cleared by California.
Right, okay. So take us back to June 2017, I think is the month when Jon Jones initially test positive for turinabol.
Yeah, basically test positive, got a ban. He's obviously returning from the ban this weekend. But Jeff Nowitzki has told us, and the problem for me and a problem a lot of the journalists, other guys covering the sport is, and a lot of the guys there I've been in contact with over the week, there's no transparency from the UFC and USADA on why the actual reason this metabolite is still in the system. It's a picogram, which we spoke off air.
It's a very small amount.
A massively small amount, and I think Jeff Nowitzki broke it down for us. If you take a grain of salt, it's a 58 millionth of a grain of salt. But it just says to me, Jeff Nowitzki kept on going on last night when he was asked questions. I trust these USADA experts, the other scientists that are involved that have told me, but they're not showing us why or telling us why there's a residual effect still in Jon Jones' system. Exactly,
and there is an issue that a lot of us would have with that, but before we get into that, let's hear from Jeff Nowitzki. He was speaking on the Joe Rogan Experience.
These same long-term metabolites, these existed a year plus ago? It was more than a year? How long ago?
That's the thing. So July 2017 was the initial test. So what all the experts, and we'll get through this, what all the experts are telling us is there is no evidence of re-ingestion. And most likely this is still remnants from the July 2017 test, however it was to enter into a system.
Isn't the same level, isn't it approximately the same picograms that exist today in 2018 that were there in 2017?
Generally, if you look, and we can go over these numbers, it fluctuates, from single digits, it never gets into triple digits to mid double digits. So there's some as low as 9 picograms over that time. There was some at 60 picograms.
And let's explain a picogram to someone because it's a preposterously small thing.
It's insane. And, the analogy that I heard early on was, and I think John used this, throw a pinch of salt in an Olympic swimming pool. And I'm like, okay, well, you kind of wrap your head around that. Let's go the other side. Let's talk about something really small that we know of and how many times you have to break down that small particle to get to a picogram. So 1 grain of salt, and we all know what that looks like, right? You put that in front of you and you split that, and I'd mentioned this week 50 million. It's actually 58 million. If you split that 58 million times, a grain of salt, each one is a picogram.
He's taking oral turinabol. He tested positive for 15 months ago, and there's still some of it in the system. Yeah. They say that the amount that's in the system is so small that it is detectable, but it can't give you any performance enhancement whatsoever. Just doing a quick Google of oral turinabol, weightlifters use it.
Yeah.
So it would suggest that it builds muscle mass, it builds power. And when it comes to combat sports and it comes to anti-doping, there obviously should be a complete non-tolerance for any of this sort of stuff, which is, if we kind of park the idea that this is Jon Jones for a moment and we park the idea of the UFC for the moment and just treat us as any combat sport athlete. This is a deeply disturbing thing that somebody could get off with a drug that weightlifters use.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute disgrace. You know, that's why I'm so outraged about this whole incident. And, you know, these guys are going in to damage each other, you know, punch each other in the face, punch each other in the body. And when someone has that advantage, as you said, of an Olympic weightlifter and a weightlifter, that it's going to cause, and it could cause potentially fatal damage to your opponent. So it's an absolute disgrace. Again, you know, Jeff Nowitzki, as you heard there, it's whats and ifs. You know, we're not getting any clear answers, and that's what's frustrating everyone about this whole issue, is there's no transparency from USADA or the UFC.
What have they said?
Literally along the lines of what Jeff Nowitzki. There's been no real follow-up. It's all been, oh, you know, I believe in what these guys have said, without actually showing us why this is still in Jon Jones' system. And there is grey areas in terms of when, you know, when Jon was tested, in terms of his ban. He was out for a number of months. He was allowed, I think it was a 7-month period between, I think, February maybe and August of last year, where he wasn't actually tested, you know, during his ban, which I find pretty insane. But the fact they haven't relayed this information to Nevada as well in the build-up to the fight says to me that maybe they knew something in relation to Jon Jones not being allowed to be licensed by Nevada, and had, you know, plan B, which they've obviously moved this week to California, because Jon Jones spoke with California on the 11th of December and he was cleared to fight in California.
Okay.
It's just a bit coincidental, the whole situation, for me.
Yeah, and just to give the other side of the story, Dana White was on ESPN and said the reason why they didn't hold on to see what Nevada were going to say is because it's Christmas time, and, you know...
Well, Jeff Nowitzki said again last night they could have waited till Thursday or Friday, but it was cutting it too tight. Yeah. Well, why not pull Jon Jones off the card? Have him fight in California and let the rest of the guys who their whole you know, preparation has been messed up by Jon Jones, let them fight in Nevada, let the fans go that have travelled over from Sweden and the likes, who, you know, a lot of people have to cancel their plans, or they're just going to Vegas and they're not seeing a fight now, is because of Jon Jones, and the UFC is, you know, moving this fight card to California.
And the key part about this, for me, is that Jon Jones isn't a universally liked character within the UFC.
No.
In fact, he's one of the most disliked characters. Just for people who are coming to the story fresh, and Jon Jones entirely, explain that to us.
Basically, Jon Jones, I think, was May 2012, originally got arrested for a DWI offence in the United States. He's had numerous amount of occasions, you know, tested positive for cocaine. Then obviously in June 2016, another banned substance, suspended for 1 year, and then failed that drug test last year, which obviously we're talking about now at the moment. So there's been numerous issues with Jon Jones. He's more or less done a total 180 on his turn. He used to play this, you know, pretty good boy image up until about a year and a half ago, when he fought Daniel Cormier again. You know, the tables were turned. A lot of sort of footage was seen of him and Daniel Cormier and the nasty things he was saying to Daniel. So he's playing the bad boy role now, and listen, he's certainly living up to it at the moment, because there seems to be no, you know, regardless of you know, if he ingested more of this substance, we don't even know about at the moment whether he did or not.
We have to assume he didn't.
Yeah, we have to assume he didn't, obviously. But it's still Jon Jones. There's always something with Jon Jones. And I don't understand why the UFC keep giving him these opportunities and these chances. It's like a lot of the guys at the top of the UFC's divisions, and the guys they put high on their pedestal, they're constantly reoffending in different ways. No matter what it might be, outside of the octagon, inside of the octagon, their actions, obviously in the build-up to fights, there's always issues with guys like this. But Jon Jones is... He's not a light guy, and again, you know, I think we'll have a clip coming up in a moment of a press conference, a Swedish colleague of mine, where he was totally rude and more or less bullying Isabel from Kimura.se, and it was, you know, I just thought it was disgraceful.
Well, let's actually hear that clip. That was from the press conference in California this week.
Hi, over here. I'm going to start with a couple of questions to Jon. How come this is the third time we're actually taking focus from the fighters and the fights and talking about what you have in your body, whether it's a picogram or a pictogram? Why have you tested now positive?
Next question, please. Thank you.
Oh, wow. All right. Dana White, tell me, why are we still having this guy here instead of seeing a 2-year suspension like Frank Mir?
Why are we still? Why are we still? What? What's the question? Hold on. Hold on.
Sit down.
I'm sitting down.
I want to take the mic from her. Better questions. Better journalism.
I don't understand what your question is.
Is there a real
what's the reason?
Better
for him
journalism.
having
Better
a
journalism.
picogram
You suck.
in his body?
Better journalism.
Hold on. Let him talk. What's the question?
What's the reason for Jon Jones having a picogram in his body?
Yeah, that's been the topic of
That's
this
why
entire.
I'm asking him.
Yeah,
Have you been listening?
I told you, like I told Ariel, talk to Jeff Nowitzki about that. If you want to know the science of what's going on, talk to him.
All right. Alexander, what are your thoughts? Because it's been, the focus is on this instead of the big fight coming up.
Finally, a good question.
I think it's you know it's bad for the sport. It's bad for the organization. It's not good for anyone having this type of conversations before a fight. But it doesn't really matter to me. We're here now. The fight is happening, and I'm happy for that. And I've never been this ready ever. So let's go. Let's do it.
Last question to Cyborg. Cyborg?
Yes.
I can see you don't have that energy in your face. Are you affected about this?
About what?
All this mess.
You don't have energy in your face?
I have a lot of energy. I can fight now.
Who is this girl? Who are you?
Hey, I have a lot of energy.
Where did you come from?
That smile.
Okay, I think we can hear the Jon Jones reaction to our question there.
Yeah, it's disgraceful.
Well, I think people can make up their own mind about that.
Well, I think the questions were totally valid. We're not getting the answers.
That's what I was just about to ask, just to kind of like give some finality to this point of the science, because like you don't have a background in actually going into the scientific detail of all of this, but you have been looking at the story in some detail over the past couple of days. Has there been a full explanation on the part of USADA, the part of Jeff Nowitzki or the UFC that would explain why this is still in the system, as to why this drug still manifests itself? Because they say it's still there and they say it's not going to have an effect, but they don't say why it's still there. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, and we have got literally along the line, and the whole process of the last week is I believe in USADA from Jeff Nowitzki, other scientists I've talked to, these guys are totally reputable. I'm not saying they're not reputable, but, where is the actual proof and evidence that they need to show us in order for them to convey transparency? There's been none. There's no actual proof and 100% evidence that, relaying to the reasons as why this metabolite is still in Jon Jones' system. Well, we don't know. We're not scientists, but we're asking the questions, and we have to get transparency in this.
Just on the optics of all of this, from a UFC perspective and how they deal with anti-doping. So Richard McLaren was the arbiter for the case, who people will know from the McLaren report, which brought down the whole Sochi empire, if we can use that phrase, with regards to Russia and the Winter Games in 2014. He was the guy who said he couldn't determine if the use of the drug was intentional, first of all, and couldn't determine if it was actually his performance. Now, Jeff Nowitzki obviously took that on board and says that this is all well and good. I believe what Richard McLaren is saying. Jeff Nowitzki, of course, the man who brought down Lance Armstrong. So the UFC have got two massive hitters. Like, you could arguably say the two biggest anti-doping stories this century have been dealt with by these two men. Do you think that they're satisfied having these two guys on board rather than actually looking into the job that they're doing?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to be satisfied when you have a name like Jeff Nowitzki. But is Jeff Nowitzki doing himself any favours? Not in my book. The way he came across last night, there was a press conference late last night, and the UFC have said, and this is something they should have done a long time ago, is obviously the tainted supplement issue. We're having a revised list as early as next year. Why hasn't that been done a number of months ago? When the UFC are an organisation, along with USADA, who have, they'll flag violations. That's basically tainting someone before they've done their due process and due diligence into the actual A and B samples of what happens. And we've seen that this year, especially in the UFC, in terms of, tainted supplements. And that was along the lines of the Jon Jones issue as well. John has said it was a tainted supplement. So why isn't this list constantly revised? And why are they putting out flagging issues on fighters? And, in numerous amount of cases this year, they've actually overturned them. it's tainting a guy with a brush. Things need to be done properly, and they're not being done properly from the USADA or the UFC, and the lack of transparency, I think, is what's really killing the credibility of both at the moment.
What sort of job has Nowitzki done so far in his role with the UFC? He's been there for a few years at this point.
Yeah, you know, it's been okay. Obviously, this year has been a bit of a mess in terms of what I've just explained there, in terms of, flagging guys and then having to reverse that on certain situations. But, okay, but still, again, what I'm talking about here, the transparency, nothing is coming across the way we should be informed about what is in these guys' systems, how it's been getting into their systems, how it's staying in their systems. There's a very, very sort of, deft lack of credibility that is coming across at the moment, I feel, from the UFC and from USADA.
Just then, one final, just to reiterate that he said that McLaren couldn't determine if the use of the drug was intentional. I don't see, if you believe...
But why take the risk?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that if they couldn't determine, if they were saying that the drug isn't performance enhancing whatsoever, well then why is it first of all on the banned list, and second of all, why is the idea of it being intentional or unintentional even a factor? But then finally, if you want to take it to the final point, if you can't determine whether it's intentional or not, are you really giving him the benefit of the doubt, giving him his history, or should all combat sports have a no tolerance policy?
All combat sports should have a no tolerance policy. Simple. It's very, very simple.
So at what point did the UFC realise this? Will they realise this?
They should have realised it already. Moving the card, I thought, is total nonsense. It's a lack of respect for everyone, basically, bar Jon Jones and the whole roster, the fans, the media. It's a total lack of respect. And the UFC, there's always something with the UFC. There's always something with Jon Jones. And it's getting to the point where it's becoming embarrassing.
This is going to sell more pay-per-views for the UFC tonight, right?
No, I actually think people have got that fed up that it might actually do a reverse effect where people don't actually want to tune in and watch Jon Jones.
But they've got this perfect villain on the main event who is screwing people over because, there's a lot, as you say, a lot of Swedes have flown over to Nevada. They're not going to get to the fight. There's fighters themselves are losing money because of you get taxed more in California.
Taxed more in California, yeah.
So they've created this monster, and all great stories have to have a great pantomime.
I like creating monsters, and guys, it's something the UFC do very well, but they don't handle it very well. They don't deal with it very well, and I think it comes to a point. If you look at, throughout the years and a lot of the top guys, obviously Conor's had his problems outside of the cage, inside the cage. We've had Brock Lesnar, obviously very, very sort of similar circumstances. Jon Jones, numerous amount of guys like that. But they love creating these guys. But when, things go wrong, and there's obviously been a bit of a slide with Jon Jones' career since 2012, it's how they pick them back up, and they don't seem to handle it very well. Like, to be honest with you, like if you were going to the fight, if you say off the ball and sent myself or yourself over to cover this fight, and you have to be moved to Vegas, to California, it's going to cost an extra 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 quid.
Yeah, true, but also you've got one hell of a story. This has become one of the biggest sports stories in the world over the past couple of days because of what's happened. And I'm not saying that's what Dana White wants to happen.
Why should the media, why should the fans stand for this? Well, fighters are dictating what's happening, what's going on for the rest of the roster. One single fighter has called this. The UFC have switched the whole card to California from Nevada. When does it get to the point where we go, no, we've had enough? USADA, the UFC aren't being transparent. They're not coming across to the media. They're not, Isabella there getting bullied from Jon Jones effectively when she's asking totally valid questions. Jon Jones should have taught on his drive to California how to answer these questions because they were going to come up.
Yeah.
Don't try and sit there and bully a journalist who's asking 100% valid questions.
It does seem that from the discourse around this, I think you are right that we are reaching a point where people are starting to get a little bit fed up with this. Just in general then, like in terms of 2018 from a UFC perspective, has it been a good financial year for them, or is this sort of a sign of them desperately clinging on to Jon Jones and the financial benefits that he brings?
I think this is the big one that they need to sort of get over the line. I think obviously the new ESPN deal that's coming in next year is obviously big bucks for them. But in terms of pay-per-views, bar Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov, it's been a very, very poor year. I think some of the Fox ratings, bar actually the last Fox card was one of their best in, I think, 2 or 3 years. But bar that, the ratings have been abysmal on US television. I think the Eddie Alvarez-Dustin Poirier fight, which is a really, really good fight on paper, was one of the lowest they've ever had in Fox. I think 100,000 tuned in it. at one point, which was absolutely abysmal. So in terms of financial year, I'm not so sure it's been the best one for the UFC, and I think maybe, as you said there, maybe the shitstorm that's come from this, might get a few extra pay-per-view buys, but I think it actually might have a detrimental effect on it, because I think people are so fed up with Jon Jones now that they mightn't tune in and buy it. And as well, it was obviously supposed to be in the T-Mobile Arena. They're contractually obliged to have 4 pay-per-views in the T-Mobile Arena every year. So I don't know what's going to happen there if there's a contractual issue with the MGM Resorts, who obviously have a large say in the T-Mobile Arena. But that's going to be interesting as well to see what happens there. But kicking forward into 2019, the ESPN deal is massive, I think, and obviously that's going to give them a huge platform in the United States. But they need to improve. Jeff Nowitzki needs to improve. USADA, the UFC, there's a massive lack of transparency. And their credibility, USADA's credibility has been thrown, right up in the air at the moment after this week. It's been pretty embarrassing for mixed martial arts, I feel.
Just to wrap up then, just one of the other storylines around this and the division is Daniel Cormier having to relinquish his title. He said he didn't want to be stripped. He probably would have been stripped.
Yeah, I think it's because of Jon Jones, though.
Explain that.
They've had obviously a tumultuous history. He's lost twice to Jon, and Jon has obviously tested positive. The belt has been given back to Daniel Cormier, and I just think the history that is there. There's a literally hate between these two guys. And I think that's why Daniel Cormier has come out with those comments. But, Daniel's up at heavyweight now. He's the heavyweight champion. I don't think the UFC wanted to keep this division really on hold anymore if Daniel wasn't going to come back down. Daniel's coming towards the end of his career. But I think when Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson are fighting, listen, Alexander Gustafsson's fighting as well. I think people are forgetting it. He's the guy who feels really sorry for this week. And maybe it's a good thing coming into the fight tonight. But these two guys put on an incredible first fight. Probably one of the best fights I've ever seen, the original fight. So it's a very, very exciting fight tonight, but the history with Daniel Cormier goes back a long way. There's a lot of deep hurt there between those two guys.
It seems to be the theme of 2018, UFC fights getting overshadowed by things outside of the octagon. Yeah. Just a quick call as well in Cyborg against Amanda Nunes.
Fabulous fight. I'm looking forward to this fight more than any other fight in the card. UFC super fight, 145-pound champion, title up on the line against the 135-pound champion Amanda Nunes. Brazil is very, very excited about this fight. Amazing fight. I think it's probably going to be the best fight of the night in my opinion, but I have to look at Chris Cyborg when there's forward pressure. Just an animal of a fighter in terms of her stand-up. Amanda Nunes as well, really, really good fighter, but I think Chris Cyborg's forward pressure and ability in terms of her boxing is going to see her over the line here. But incredible fight. There's some really, really good fights in the card, and obviously the main event. If it goes down, you never know with Jon Jones. we might have something happening later on this evening that, listen, I'll never say Jon Jones is fighting until he's in the octagon these days. Yeah. Literally making his walk out. So listen, fingers crossed. But, a lot of work for the UFC and USADA to do.
What time, Irish time, is the main card?
Probably 4 or 5 a.m. It's on BT Sports. You'll be able to watch it there. And, it'll be a late night if you're going to stay up for obviously 8 hours behind in California.
Good stuff. Niall McGrath off the brawl. Thanks a million.
Always a pleasure, Ron.